Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for being here today. Kim and I are both excited to meet you all, and we'll start by introducing ourselves. So, Kim.
So, good morning, everybody. My name is Kim Anderson. I'm an associate professor of family relations and applied nutrition at University of Guelph. Also a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous relationships, which has to do with the work we're going to talk about here today. And I'm Métis. My father's from Manitoba. My mom is non-Indigenous from BC. I grew up in Ottawa, and I live in Guelph.
Awesome. I'm Britt Luby. I'm a proud Treaty Number 3 woman. I was raised off reserve, but within my ancestral territory. I grew up hearing talks around the kitchen table about Crown Indigenous relations. My father's a former chief of Nissetuan Anishinaabe Nation, and he's currently a lead negotiator and works on the grievance committee, which researches and launches specific claims for my paternal ancestral community. And you know, one of the questions Malcolm asked me to think about today is how did I get here? And after my undergraduate degree, the grievance committee asked if I would begin studying or consider studying water resource management in our territory. And I said yes. And that carried me through an MA, it guided me through a PhD, and it got me to this table here with you as an associate professor at the University of Guelph.
So I guess we'll just jump into it. We were asked to talk a little bit about the genesis of this research lab that we're building called Mother's House. And just to describe it briefly, I'll tell a little bit quickly about the story about how it started. So because I'm a Canada Research Chair, I was thinking about applying for CFI, Canada Foundation for Innovation Funds, to build a lab. Like all researchers and research scientists, we have labs. And most of my work is social science, so I was thinking, well, I could build a lab with a bunch of desks and computers for grad students and so on, but it doesn't really suit who I am and the type of work that I'm trying to do. So a lot of what I study is my PhD is in Indigenous relationships, so I study relationships, and I thought if I'm going to do work going into the future, not just my scholarly work, but also my work in community, my work as a person. How do I do something that facilitates relationship building? And that's relationship building among the human relations, which is the social relations that I'm interested in. But as Indigenous peoples, we think about all our relations, right? Relations with land, with the plants, with the animals, and with the ancestors, so spirit relations. How do we start to facilitate a process of that relationship building? And as research scientists, how do we investigate the impact of that? What does it mean to do that process? So that's the academic side of it. But I guess, as an Indigenous scholar, I have a whole other world of research and practice that comes from an Indigenous knowledge production, ways of knowing. And so the idea for the lab actually came to me when I was fasting out in Saskatchewan. So we go out on the land and we fast in spring and fall. I don't do it every year, but anyway, this was the fourth in a series of 4 fasts that I was doing in Saskatchewan with my teacher, Maria Campbell. And while I was out there, I was trying to think about the next phase of my life and my contribution, really. And it started to come to me about, as an older woman, how was I going to build space for relationship building? How was I going to build space for young people coming forward? And as a professor, of course, that's our job too, right? Is to create and make space for students to learn and for knowledge. So I was fasting with Maria, who's a grandmother who had this incredible home space that she turned into like a cultural center, a place where we went and did ceremony and so on. And I came down from the fast and I said to her, do you think we can do what you do here in an institutional setting, in a university where it is that I work with my young people, right? And she said, yeah, I think you can do it. So that was the start of it. 4 years later, we're sorry? Oh, okay. 4 years later, we are at a point. So I came home, and the University of Guelph has this beautiful arboretum, and I thought, well, maybe this would be a good place to build a grandmother's home and to begin to explore, to set into motion and then to explore and build knowledge about how you build relationships in a space like that. And what does it mean to build a space in which those relationships can develop? So that's what happened. And here we are. We're going to talk a little bit more about where we're at with this. We have just hired the architects that are going to work with us in a community design process to build our grandmother's house, the Nookums house. And that in and of itself is really a knowledge building process, because with the architects, we're going to explore these questions of what makes a grandmother space. And they will, these are Indigenous architects that we're working with. They will bring all of their knowledge about processes of going through those kind of spaces that they know to help us. So that's what I'll say. Good morning, Malcolm. So nice to see you. We just finished talking about the genesis of Nookums House, and maybe we'll let you jump in.
All right.
So maybe
well, I believe Malcolm.
We'll turn over to Brittany. Yeah.
Yeah, Malcolm's in the green room. And for folks in the audience, I don't know if you've been on this side of the screen, but we're all learning this new tech. So one of the things we wanted to share with you is how did we move from idea genesis to this stage in the process where we have an architect and we're looking at building in this beautiful space. And you know, a building is a manifestation of relationships. And so I really want to speak to you about community support in sort of raising a building. So how do we get from idea genesis to being prepared to start creating this physical hub? And the first thing that Kim did, Kim invited me on this journey with her, was form a team. And one thing that I think is really important about what happened in Nookums House is that this team was formed across 3 colleges. And so what we have is institutional buy-in. We don't have the Indigenous research hub being siloed in a specific college. And I think it's really important that we resist the tendency to silo Indigenous faculty members and Indigenous initiatives, and to work to establish that institutional buy-in. And, you know, quite practically, we also needed to pool resources to compete for funding to create an Indigenized space. And the Canada Foundation for Innovation, we looked at them as a potential funder, particularly the Guelph grant. And if you're successful, you get 40% of your funding from the Canada Foundation for Innovation. You apply for 20% from the province, and then as an institution, you're responsible for that 20%. And by working across colleges, we were able to share those resources and make that 20%, share that, right? Share that. So the second piece was, you know, looking at our other stakeholders. So we have, you know, some of that institutional buy-in, we have the support from our colleges, but now we need to look at establishing relationships with non-academic campus stakeholders who are going to be essential in supporting us on this journey. So we turn to physical resources, which is responsible for building and maintaining physical assets on campus. and will require their support to maintain this hub once it's built. We had to partner and build relationships with the Arboretum, which was established in the 1960s as a natural heritage space and will become the home for Nokam's House. And we needed to find common ground, right, across these different units. And, when we think about it, physical resources is focused on the preservation and maintenance of buildings, thinking about liability and accessibility and all those important things. The Arboretum is thinking about conservation. And we, as Indigenous researchers, are thinking about reclamation and cultural revitalization. And so I think it's really important for folks to invest the time in finding that common ground. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission helped to provide us with common cause. So we've identified our campus stakeholders, we've worked for institutional buy-ins, and what we needed to do next was build relationship with community. We needed to make sure it was safe for our mentors, for our Indigenous teachers, our elders to come and use this space with us. And so Kim led us through ceremony, coordinated walks with elders and knowledge keepers and community members through the land. And also we engaged in workshops. And it's just so essential to remember that cultural safety, what a safe place means for Indigenous persons. It's not just the risk assessment, that the university is going to do. It's not just those liability concerns, but we need to look through that institutional lens. But then we also need to look through a cultural safety lens and work to find that common ground. And Kim identified that the next sort of step in that creation of the physical hub, which was finding an architect. And I just want to flag really briefly that there is an institutional barrier to indigenization and decolonization at this stage. Who is able to bid for projects at your institution? Look at your list. Do you have Indigenous firms on that list? If not, right, do you need to revisit it? Do you need to open it up? Or do you need to think about bridging programs to allow for Indigenous competition throughout the entire life cycle? Now, we were incredibly fortunate to receive a bid from Brooke McElroy. And what was so important, I think, for me personally, and I believe for the entire team, was making sure that we found a firm that had common values. And Brooke McElroy values Indigenous mentorship, and they're mentoring Indigenous youth. They're supporting Indigenous businesses throughout the entire life cycle. So they're looking at bringing on Indigenous consultants and Indigenous suppliers. And I think that this is so essential that we don't just focus on the product, right? This is going to be an Indigenous research lab, but that we're looking at living those values from the ground up, right? And building our values into the foundation. And yeah, Kim, I think I'll turn it over to you now. Do you want to add anything into sort of this making the idea come alive?
I think about like when I was thinking about policy related questions, what in terms of policy do we learn? Like with this question, what is it? So
Kim, your mic is cutting out. I don't know if it's just my end and my internet that I'm struggling to hear you.
Okay.
People hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, Brittany? Better? Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried a few variations here. So yeah, what I was just thinking about, what does this have to do with policy? How can it inform? Because we see it really as an opportunity to inform how do you build spaces for knowledge production into the future? How do we create, this is a lab, a science research lab, but we're building a grandmother's cabin as the lab. And why are we doing that? And I think that kind of answers this question around decolonization and indigenization, because we want to build, set the stage and set the space for the type of knowledge production and the type of learning that's happened outside the institution, since forever, and that has informed Indigenous knowledge production. So that when Indigenous people come into the institution, they see something that they recognize, that they feel safe and comfortable in, that it can create that kind of space which will enhance creativity, innovation, all of those things that might not happen in other places where people don't feel comfortable or don't feel like they can kind of like move into the types of relationships that will allow that knowledge to be produced. It's human relationships with land, relationships with spirit and ancestors through ceremony, right? So I was thinking about, I had a student when I was walking around with them in the Arboretum, and they told me one time, this is the first time I've ever felt safe on campus, when we're out here walking around with you, who's kind of, like an anti-figure, and we're in this land-based space, and I feel like I can finally open up enough to be able to be open to the learning experience. So for me, that's my thinking around it. And I think that as we build this and as we research both the process of building it as well as the types of knowledge that we can produce once we crack open space for those relationships, we may be able to inform other institutions, academic, government, whatever, research institutes, about how you can set a stage for that type of Indigenous knowledge to be fostered, right? In a way that it has been fostered all this time, right? Because we've been out there building knowledge and doing this kind of work. So that's our grannies. We're going to build our grandmother's house, literally. Of course, this has to do also with ways in which people have been marginalized in terms of gender, racialized, obviously, disability. We're thinking about a lot of those factors that have prohibited the type of work that needs to get done, the type of knowledge that we want to foster and produce, the type of creativity we want to do. And I think now more than ever, I'm talking to you from BC, where I was actually stopped because of the mudslides. I was trying to get through somewhere else. And so it's just like really raw for me right now about how we are in this time where we need to create spaces where people can, first of all, build relationships with each other and with the environment that will allow us to do the critical work and the immediate work that's in front of us. And also where people can also find a sense of peace and hope, right? Like, because we really need that at this point, right? So, that's my intention. These are intentions that came out of spiritual work that I did, as well as work as a research scientist. Those things come together in this space and in the work, the collaborative work that I'll be doing with the two other scientists, researchers that are part of this lab that we're going to create together, because we come from, our various Indigenous perspectives and trainings to bring together the work that we're going to do going forward. So I'll turn it back over to you, Brittany. I think we have to end soon, from what I see.
Yeah, it looks like our time is running out, and I just, I want to underline that and underscore that message of hope, because what Nokum's House will be, on its completion, it's going to be an embodiment, right, of many different Indigenous knowledges because of this full life cycle approach: Indigenous construction and design knowledge, Indigenous horticultural knowledge, and it's going to facilitate Indigenous knowledge production as a research lab. And despite these many hopes, what I want to do just very quickly is draw attention to a couple of institutional hurdles to creating Indigenized spaces. And I want to take a full life cycle approach to this as well. When we look at where the sort of senior decision-making authority lies in the institutions, we need to increase Indigenous presence there as well. Cluster hires at the assistant professor level are phenomenal for increasing visibility, but those are people who don't yet have the power of academic freedom. So you increase visibility without actually changing the power dynamics in the institution. So we need to make sure that we're thinking about equity hires, in human resources, in the Office of Research, in the Provost's office, on the Board of Governors, that full system. I also really want to highlight the importance of creating committed budget lines for Indigenous initiatives. If you are committed to a certain program and you have your faculty members and your staffs kind of in this continuous grant renewal cycle, it's going to make it difficult to build sustainable programming. So think about those committed budget lines for your committed initiatives. And then that way as well, we create opportunities for projects to be community driven from the ground up, instead of encouraging people who are operating different programs or centers on campus to kind of fit into these top-down priorities. And then lastly, I think we really need to focus on identifying the next generation of academic leaders and making it possible for them to assume a seat at the table. And Niwandanamak is a collective that's in my home territory here in Treaty Number 3. It's between 4 communities in the province, and they're working on building a highway. And they identified that there's 120 construction and project management jobs available, but that there's barriers to getting into into these training programs. And the 4 barriers were sustainable living wage, transportation, prereq support, and childcare. And I think that some of these are transferable over to the institution, and some of them we can easily remedy if we choose to, right? So when we think about intergenerational poverty on reserves as a result of the Indian Act, and service gaps that make it difficult for First Nations people to access institutions, we need to respond critically to these. So look at the Indigenous talent that you want to draw, and then look at the transportation options, right, from those communities to your institution. Consider perhaps offering transportation grants for youth to make it possible, if there isn't public transit, for them to reach campus, to make kids who might be in more remote regions able to come to your institution safely and comfortably with the knowledge and confidence that they can get home and maintain their community connections. Because right now, without those grants, there's like a mental health inequity that Indigenous students are bearing the brunt of, because campus empties out over the holiday season, and we haven't provided them with supports to get home. So there's an unequal burden of loneliness on our campus that I think we need to remedy if we want to allow our students to excel and to reach their full potential. And I think we also need to provide paid training days and per diem for Indigenous staff or students who might take up positions within the campus, because it costs money to make money. So let's make it possible for people to get the prereqs and the training that they need in a safe and comfortable way to take up positions within our campus. And those are my calls to action, my pleases into the universe. And now, Kim, I will turn it over to you.
Well, I'm mindful that our time's up, but I will. I don't know if we have questions or if anybody wants to hang in, if we can hang in, because I think one of the things about relationships is it's so weird and difficult to try to do what we're doing right here. Like, I'm looking at a screen, all I see is Brittany. I have no idea who I'm talking to or what their interests might be. If we were in a room together, of course, we would say, okay, what do you do? What is it that what do we share? What do you want to know from us? How can we sort of like help each other think through some of the things that are going on? So I don't know, do we have time? I see the discussion forum. I'll open it up. Okay, here we go. Thank you for this. Okay, we're in a world where people are disconnecting. How will Grandmother's House be attracting people outdoors in such a digital world? I think that, okay, somebody's asking if we can have an extended time. Yeah, it would be good. It would be great to actually talk to some folks out there. So how do we attract people outdoors in such a digital world? I think people are hungry for connection with land. And one of the things that Nookham's House offers is accessibility. I think that's one of the things that I think about urban Indigenous peoples. So Brittany's, does her work in Treaty 3 as well as around the University of Guelph area. I've been urban all my life, and I'm doing increasingly local work where I live, just because of not wanting to travel and so on. But one of the things I've always said is, like, we tell our youth, oh, it's all about the land, connect to the land and so on. And then the urban youth feel dispossessed, because there's like, well, do I have to drive 6 hours to get to the bush so I can feel like a real Indian? You know, do I have to drive do I have to go out on a canoe? Do I have to go out hunting? These things are expensive and they're inaccessible to urban youth. And a lot of our peoples actually, you know, 70% of Indigenous people are urban. So thinking about Indigenous futurities, a lot of my work is about how do you make land-based education accessible. So the thing about Nookums House is it's right on campus. And when we chose the site, we said we want it close enough that students, if they want to come back and forth in between classes and do some gardening or have a little smudge or light a fire, whatever they want to do, it's something they can pop in and out of. So it's like a lived, it's where they are, it's where they're at. It's a lived experience. So I think that's one of the ways to do it, is you make it accessible. And one of the things we talk about with one of the organizations I work with, we say, well, what's the definition of culture? And it's everyday good living. So how do we make that an experience of everyday good living, a lived, like daily experience for people who are going to engage with it, is by making it accessible right there for them. So I don't know if you have anything to say. Maybe Brittany, you want to say something about that? I'll read the question. Yeah.
I think for me as well, one of the things is talking and giving people the confidence to get outside safely, and maybe having resources so that people can get outside safely in different seasons if maybe they don't have all the gear. So, you know, do we have some quality winter boots available? Are people able to purchase them at a subsidized rate? You know, do we have mittens available and toques? So, you know, I think people want to get outside, and there's all those opportunities that happen organically once there's the space to do it, but then also giving people the support, the material support that they need to engage safely in those spaces, I think is another really important element.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not, you know, if you are urban, you don't necessarily have the resources to do some of those things, especially if you're, you know, you've been in poverty for a couple generations, you know, and then like my heart feels for young people like that, because then they feel even more dispossessed, right? Because they feel like they're supposed to be something that they aren't and they don't even have access to. So, you know, we do all sorts of stuff in urban settings like that, right? That we bring those things in, we bring teachers in, we do work with them locally. So that's what we're doing on campus. And of course, as researchers, we're creating a lab to see like what if, right? What if you made these things accessible? What if you tried this type of learning on a southern urban campus? So are there other questions? Or are we got 27 people out there. So hello, and 27 people out there somewhere. I guess we'd be happy to answer questions too if people have them. They want email. Oh, here's a question. Yeah. Thinking about people as people. You know, one of the things that I find, so my lab, my students, I have usually 7 to 11 or 12 students at any time in my research lab. And we call it the kitchen table lab, because we cook together, we eat together, and we talk about what's going on in our lives together before we do any other work at our lab meetings. And I found, and during COVID, we did stuff on Zoom regularly, doing kind of like things at what we could do together on Zoom. And I find that once you create space for people to be people first and to share what it is that's going on in their lives, to eat together, to have informal time for building relationships, all the other stuff just follows so much more easily, right? And I think that's the relationship building that we're talking about. And I think that's also why so many of our students feel alienated, because they don't have opportunities to be who they are, to share who they are in these learning environments, in these knowledge production environments. We don't make space for that. And, you know, I don't know why. I guess people feel like they don't have time to make space for that. But I find when you make space for it, the other work happens so much more easily. So I mean, maybe it sounds kind of trite and obvious or something, but what I've tried to do is set up my lab as a relational, in a relational space. Some of my students call me auntie, and you know, I try to take on that role with them in terms of nurturing and fostering where they're going, because I see that as my responsibility as an older woman, right? So yeah. Do you have anything you wanted to say on that one? I see.
Oh, I love, just this idea of treating people as people. And I think one thing, people are, unique and have, such an incredible range of gifts that they may choose to develop and exercise. And I think that's one of the importance of thinking creatively about how to hit equity targets within the institution, right? And again, cluster hires at the assistant professor level, which we've seen a lot of in Canada. I mean, they're fantastic for a lot of reasons. And I don't want to downplay the important work that they can do. But we also need to be thinking about hiring at different levels so that we have some folks coming in at the associate and full professor level, so that there's people who can advocate for students who might not have fully developed their voice yet, right? And helping them on that journey, right? Folks who can advocate, who have that academic freedom, but also, having Indigenous representation, in your administrative support staff and in these different spots within the university, so that youth can identify mentors, throughout the institution, not just at the front of the classroom, because, some of these people are going to want to grow in to, people who are different than, me as a faculty member. So I think as well, just when we start doing that, the amount of information about the entire organism that we can then give to our youth to help them grow and become the people they want to become just increases exponentially, right? If you don't just have your information siloed in a particular department with a particular professor, but there's information about that entire organism, there's so much more we can give to our students as they become the people that they want to and the people that they dream of.
So I see a couple people putting things in on the chat still. And I'll just say there's a comment about the Indigenous STEM Field Day at McMaster. And I will say that thinking about the whole continuum of learning and of learners, it's really important to bring in Indigenous children and youth, like long before they're, at the end of high school to visit the university. And so a number of us in universities do that. You have grade 7 and 8s coming for science camps and all that kind of stuff. Their own science camps that have particular types of Indigenous places like Nookham's House, right? Knowledge places where they can come and see a bit of themselves, but also, for students who they don't know anybody who ever went to university, right? It's not a place that they would think it's not for them. It's not a boundary they would cross. We do. Universities do this. We can do more of it, bringing kids in early on so that they start to feel like it's a place where they belong. And if you wait until they're, you're doing the high school tours or whatever, then, that's a missed opportunity, I would say. Yeah. Are there any more questions out there or any comments? Like, we welcome comments, and I'm not sure if you got the whole idea, but basically we're building a grandmother's home on campus. So, and then we're going to research what happens when you do that. And we're going to research what happens when you're building it. What does that mean? What does it even mean? What makes a grandmother space? And once it's built, what are we going to do, right? So our colleague, Sherry Longboat, who's not here today, is a scholar she teaches in the Department of Planning, in planning. And so this is like really interesting research for her too, to see how do you go about planning and developing such a space in an institution. So look forward to lots of interesting stuff coming out from her, and we'll carry on, right? We don't have a moderator, I guess. So it's like, I mean, I'll sit here and drink tea if somebody wants to stay on and ask any more questions. But if it looks like we're petering out, I do see that there's 16 people out there. We're dropping off, so folks have another thing to go to. I don't know. I think we have something in kind of like the poster section or something on this, right? I should know this, but yeah, our project manager gave them some information to go in the post room. Maybe I'll go see if it's there. Anyway, how do science students connect with this? Well, I guess once we get the house up and running, there will be various types of research going on. We also are really lucky. We started a Bachelor of Indigenous Environmental Science and Practice at the University of Guelph, a bachelor's degree. It started this year. We hired 2 Indigenous scholars as faculty, one who is a kind of research chair and another who's a faculty member. And that's Jessie Pop and Sue Chiblo, 2 Anishinaabe women. And they will surely be part of some of the activities that are going on. We're already talking with Jessie about looking at the animal relations around the house. How do we build relations? How do we go into that space and work with them? So certainly environmental science, I think landscape architecture students and plant biology students, all that kind of stuff, will be involved with the lands around in terms of how do we indigenize a space, around the house as well with the lands. Do you have anything to say about that, Brittany? I mean, your history, but you work with environmental science too, right?
Yeah, I think that, how do we, invite science students to connect with this or enable them to connect with this? I think that when you have the space, right? When we have the space, when we're in this urban forest, right? We can create opportunities for our students to build those relationships with our first teachers, our plant and animal teachers. And it's no longer a PowerPoint, right? You can be in the space, it's accessible, and you can start practicing that close looking, that observation. And it's creating a platform where that's possible. And I think that there's all sorts of really, exciting research possibilities, which will require further discussion with our larger community, our Indigenous community and mentors, and also, the Arboretum itself. But yeah, what does renaturalization look like? Is there opportunity to teach people how to become seed carriers, right? When we're, planting and working with these Indigenous species in the space. Nicholas Rio asked this really interesting question about invasive species and what happens if we approach invasive species through an Anishinaabe lens. What teachings can they give us about ourselves and our actions? Ask them, why are they there? What might they need? What might they be telling us about ourselves? And I think there's really exciting opportunities to think about, what's an invasive or introduced species, and how might they work, in partnership and collaboration with Indigenous species. So I think when you have the space and you're taking it off screen and you're in a position where you can build those relationships, you're in a position where you can respond to those messages that are coming from those plant and animal teachers and go all sorts of really interesting directions.
And I see, Liwei, you're interested in our BIESP program. And so you can certainly connect with me. I'll take the call. I'll take the call. But Brittany and I don't teach and work in that college. However, it is very interesting. You can get we can probably send you what the curriculum is if you're interested. We're in our first year. I say we because we are actually part of helping build it, but we're not in that college. But yes, we are recruiting students for that program. It's very exciting. It includes a cultural and language component. It includes history, because we see that, that we're looking at need as a broader perspective for students who are looking at gaining Indigenous environmental science knowledge. So for example, they need to have at least one language course, Indigenous language course, and so on. So it's cool, it's exciting. And yeah, we'll connect. So go ahead, Britt.
Oh, I was just going to, just affirm that willingness and interest in connecting. So Liwei, I work on the Minoman project. It's a crop restoration initiative happening on the Winnipeg River. And we're working to revitalize Minoman, which is commonly known in English as wild rice, with Nsechuan Anishinaabe Nation. But we're actually partnered with the School of Engineering, and one of our doctoral candidates is the recipient of an NSERC. So, those kind of members of our team may have some interesting insights to share as well, because again, I'm on the qualitative side, but we do have people in sort of the NSERC envelope as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of Indigenous knowledge production really is so interdisciplinary. So yeah, we all, we work, I've been on NSERC grants as well around water research. So yeah, yes, that's right, we connect. Okay, well, thank you everybody for hanging in. Look for us. We'll be coming forward with stuff as time goes on, and we really appreciate your interest. So, see you later.
Thanks.
Bye.